Welcome back to Samwise. I'm Samwise, and today I would like to give a brief series breakdown for The Pendragon Cycle by Stephen R Lawhead. Don't let my books back here deceive you, I only have the first three, but this is a 5-book series chronicling not the life of King Arthur, but rather the land and cultures and people that created the historical setting and the mythical setting from which King Arthur could emerge as a figure in both myth and history. In my mind, this is one of the best Arthurian retellings out there. It combines, like I said, both mythic elements and historical elements pretty expertly. And what Lawhead does in this series is quite remarkable. So let's start at the beginning. The first book in the series is pictured here. It's Talisin. And this really, you will see in a lot of Arthur retellings that they start before Arthur and they'll go back to Merlin. Talisin goes before that. It covers the fall of Atlantis, with the main character of the series being Caris, an exiled princess of Atlantis who's also like a female gladiator. She's quite a unique character, and her journey as she watches her civilization Atlantis crumple around her as she sees the impending doom, knowing there's nothing she can do about it. But then also following the bard and poet Talisin, who is the titular character, and watching him grow from being a boy to a man and learning not just what it is to be a man, but also the power that music has and stories have, and how there's a greater power in being a bard even than, in some cases, being a king. And right from the beginning, you know that these two are going to end up being Merlin's parents. So you're just waiting for them to get together, and you watch that over the course of this first book, and that leads us into book 2, which is Merlin. Merlin really follows the journey from when he is a boy, as he gets raised among both people of Atlantis and people of the more tribal nature of Great Britain, which is Talisin's family, as he fights with this dual nature within himself, and as he grows from being a boy to a man, being a poet, a bard, a king, a warrior, a prophet. Lawhead really takes a lot of the different myths of Merlin, even a madman, takes many of them and weaves it together into one cohesive narrative. And that book really brings us up to the point of before Arthur is born. And then we go to book 3, Arthur, which chronicles Arthur as a boy, his rise, becoming king, instituting what he calls the Kingdom of Summer, which is his kingdom over Britain, and then also leads to his fall. Now, here's the thing with the Pendragon Cycle. Originally, it was just written as a trilogy, which is why I have 3 books behind me. But the publisher promised Lawhead a 4-book deal, and then as he wrote the first 2, said, actually, we need you to take those last 2 books and put it into one. And so Arthur has been criticized by those who've read the series as feeling like there's 2 books worth of material here, but a whole book of that cut out. And that really is sort of a fair criticism. So, a few years later, when Lawhead moved publishers, they said, we'd like you to finish the series, and he wrote book 4, which is called Pendragon, and book 5, which is called Grail. Both of those are set during the events of the book Arthur, where Arthur chronicles the entire reign of Arthur, and there's some big parts of that reign that get skipped over. These 2 follow-up books kind of help fill in those gaps. Pendragon covers a Saxon invasion as well as a plague going over Great Britain that Arthur has to deal with, and the help of Merlin as he's guided through it. And then Grail covers basically the Galahad character of the story, as he fights a much more spiritual and supernatural battle for the faith heart of Britain during that time. And we really get a raw, unfiltered expression of some of the evil characters in the series who have been plotting against Arthur and also against Arthur's faith as well. One thing to note about this series is its style. The first book, oddly enough, is written in standard third person, like you'd expect just any other novel to be written, but that's the only one in the series that's written that way. Every other novel after that, Merlin, Arthur, Pendragon, and Grail, are written as chronicling accounts, most often by the characters. So Merlin is written by Merlin, Grail is written by the Galahad character, Arthur's written by a couple of different people, and then the book Pendragon is once again a Merlin book. He's chronicling it. And this really lends to a feeling of authenticity with these stories. Rather than trying to fit every point that Lawhead wants to make into some 3-act structure or rigid hero's journey, he leans more into this historical feeling that not everything in history is clean, not everything wraps up with a perfect bow. Sometimes characters leave and you were hoping for so much more out of maybe a historical figure, or maybe a threat comes up unexpectedly that you weren't necessarily looking for. And he leans a lot more into that feeling of realism than he does into some sort of traditional plot structure. To me, this worked very well. I know it might be alienating for some, but I think with the overall project that he's doing in this series, it ends up being the exact right call for what this series needed. And because Lawhead is not just a good storyteller and being able to recount myths very well, but he's also a good historian, this blending of the two really adds to a feeling of what may have been, what may have led to many of the myths of Arthur, but also some of the history that, not necessarily of Arthur, since there's some question there, but of that era in history. We start in Talisin with the Romans leaving Great Britain. And so there's history that's taken there, but also Talisin is a mythic figure himself that Lawhead incorporates. There's many other mythic parts of that culture that Lawhead draws from, including the Wastelands and other bards and other legendary kings. But he also weaves that in, like I said, with some really interesting historical events that lend to, just like the style that it's written, lend to a feeling of realism. One of the major themes that Lawhead deals with this is, what does it mean to be a good ruler? Because, the Britons have lived under the Romans. They've known what a tyrannical, hard rule looks like. And Arthur, coming out of that, is trying to get a bunch of warring tribe chiefs, as it were, to come together under one banner. And so we've seen what, despots ruling through force of will, what that looks like. But is it even possible to rule by principle, to rule by law, to rule in a way that is just and fair? Which is why you hear that ideal in what I described earlier, the kingdom of summer. Is that even something that can be achieved? Lawhead asks those questions and doesn't give answers that are preaching or definitive in any way, but rather he lets the characters wrestle with these things. One of the other major themes that Lawhead wrestles with is the paganism of Old England and the new faith of Jesu that comes in the first book. And so that becomes a theme that gets wrestled back and forth throughout the series. And even though Lawhead pretty clearly is more on the faith side of things than he is on the paganism side of things, he lets the characters wrestle with this for themselves. And the conclusions that he comes to are not a standard form of Christianity that you would see today in any type of modern church, whether that's Protestant or Catholic, but rather harkens back to older faith traditions that are much more in line with what Arthur and his contemporaries would have either believed in or would have encountered. It makes for, once again, that feeling of realism with this series that I personally found really engaging and was one of my favorite parts about it. I know there's a lot of other Arthurian retellings out there. I know a lot of people have a fondness for Bernard Cornwell's series, which I have to read sometime soon. I personally have a great fondness for T.H. White, his Once and Future King series, and then there's many other from Marion Zimmer Bradley and others who have written Arthurian retellings. It seems like they're a dime a dozen. I think what makes this series special is because it's not Arthur focused. It's focused on building out this world, giving you a bird's eye perspective on not just the man Arthur, but also the time that he lived in, what the events were that led to him being the king that he is, and all the different, like I said, the mythic things that Lawhead pulls from. Really tie it all together in an engaging and interesting way. I think those questions of faith that he plays with become really interesting and develop very naturally as the series goes on. There's other Arthur tellings out there, but if you want something that really feels like a historical epic, I think the Pendragon Cycle is a great series to turn to. The books are engaging. Even though there's 5 of them, they're not crazy. They're like 400, 500 pages. They're not crazy long. And they're really engaging reads. There's parts of them that are slower than others, but once again, this is leaning into that historical documentation style. In the end, I'd say if you're interested in the series, be sure to check it out. There's an adaptation of them coming sometime soon. I'm not sure if it'll be any good or not, but hopefully it gets more people to at least read these books, because they're great books. They were written from the 80s into the 90s, so it's a great piece of fantasy history that's largely gone undiscussed, especially here on BookTube, and I'd like to help add to that conversation if I'm able to. These are all worth reading and worth your time, and if you're needing a new Arthurian retelling, or if you're wondering what a good one would be to start, or maybe you've read some of the classics, like I said, T.H. White or Thomas Mallory, this really is a great one if you want to look for a unromanticized retelling of Arthur. You're not looking for something that's more on the French end of things, looking for, knights in the Crusades era. You want something that is accurate to the times, but also ties a lot of the myths together in a compelling way. The Pendragon Cycle should be a good fit for that. Anyway, guys, let me know if you've read the Pendragon Cycle. If you enjoyed this video, yeah, feel free to let me know, and hope to see you next time. As always, Godspeed.